Hello, good evening. My name is Dr. O, and welcome to Healthcaring Differently, where we inspire diverse students to explore careers in healthcare. Now, we started a few minutes late. We were having some technical difficulties, but everything is fine now. So we are very, very happy. Things are working, and I'm happy that you've tuned in. Overall, though, I hope that you tune in every Tuesday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, just like now, and follow us on all of our social media platforms so you can stay in the loop, gain valuable resources, and hear more about our next stream. Also, please sign up for our newsletter. Like the interviews and the things that we do on camera are to inspire you. It is for inspiration. But the piece that will keep you moving along your path is information. We've got information for you on diversity programs in healthcare and medicine, scholarship information, and research opportunities. So please sign up for the newsletter at healthcaringdifferently.com. We've got the QR code there. And feel free to drop your questions in every episode for me or the guest. Today's tea time. So it's a special kind of episode where you can ask me questions. We chose a theme, which is based on the feedback we got from y'all that you want to hear about work life balance. So feel free to drop your questions in the chat during the stream, and I'll make sure to answer them. And although we don't have a formal guest tonight, I do have a surprise guest. So, and that actually comes through as a response to some of the feedback we got from you folks who wanted to hear from somebody with a background in physiotherapy. So we've got have an ally tonight, and I will tell you more about her a little later on. So I felt like, okay, if I'm going to talk about work-life balance, like that's the theme. That is what came out in focus groups, that has come out in questions that medical students have asked me and university students have asked about work-life balance as a physician. I was like, okay, I'm happy to talk about it. And I do talk about it in different places, but I feel like it's important to I'm not like a work-life balance guru or something. Like I am still figuring it out. Um, and there's reasons why probably I shouldn't be teaching on it. So I'll start with those, like my disclaimers, but I'll tell you why I think it's also important for me to talk about it. So, number one is actually like I really love the work that I do. And I actually do a lot of volunteer work. I mean, like this, right? Like I love the work that I do. And sometimes I can overdo it, right? So I have been prone to overdoing it in the work life balance, doing too much work. Um, the other piece is, and I think some people would say maybe I do, have a good position to talk about it, is that also there are times where I take a hard look at my own life, and I have done that recently in the last like 2 to 3 years, as many people have done during the pandemic. And I've had to take a hard pivot actually, in my personal and professional life, um, to think about, the right balance and circumstances for me to stay well. And so I'm still in that process. Like the pivot has occurred, but I'm still in that process and can't necessarily, speak to it like I've achieved it, like I have arrived. But I'm not sure that one ever arrives at that perfect work-life balance, um, because I don't think so this is the other thing, I don't think there is actually a perfect work-life balance, like, where you've just got it all figured out. I think it's a bit of a seesaw, and at times you will be especially if you're in healthcare, there will be times where you work way too hard, and the pandemic was one of those times, there was no way around it, and then there's times where you are intentional about giving yourself, rest, um, and restoration. Uh, the fact that you folks have asked about work-life balance, though, to me is part of wellness, and I'm thinking into season 3 because we've got our lineup ready for season 2, but in season 3, perhaps we should have a few psychiatrists from different backgrounds to talk about wellness in different ways. So I know Dr. Pamela Kaduri has done a lot of work on diverse physician health, Black physician health, and physician health in general. Dr. Samra Salu has worked with youth and mental health. So yeah, we might have folks like that to give you a deeper dive in season 3. But I feel like I should be talking because like the way we design the show is I'm like auntie, right? Like, yes, 1 in 5 medical students has a parent who's a doctor, but like I can be auntie. And you asked me about work-life balance, and I've studied it and I've, tried to apply it in my own life. So hopefully I can give some guidance on that. And then finally, I think there's a way that when you're from a marginalized group or an equity deserving group or equity denied group, however you decide to frame it, but when you are not part of the dominant culture, I think you actually have to approach work life balance and wellness differently. And so that's actually the piece I'm going to focus on this evening. And I hope that you guys, you can start putting in your questions like right away for me. So I know things you folks are curious about. But I would say, so I thought I would just give some examples of really good approaches or resources. So I think fundamentally, number one is actually, even if you are from a group that's underrepresented in healthcare, even if you're from a group that's underrepresented in society or minoritized group, fundamentally, we're all human beings, and stress is stress is stress, like physiologically, the way it manifests for us. And so I think when it comes to a lot of the research on wellness and work life balance, it often applies across the board. So I do encourage you to explore resources like Yale University has a free course that's called The Science of Well-Being, and it really talks about ways to stay well in this very, busy, very intense society that we live in that expects us to produce and keep producing, right? That's part of the history here. I could get into that if you guys have questions about that. But our work cultures and school cultures are really about extracting as much from us as possible. So in that context, the free course at Yale, The Science of Well-Being, is really interactive. It gives you exercises to do, and I think fundamentally can help like everybody, regardless of what your identity is, because it talks about the fundamental benefits of like meditation, see, I started breathing a little bit softer. I'm like, right, breathing, right? Meditation, spending time with friends, sleep and rest, the importance of having, people that you can say good morning to actually has been shown for benefit. The benefits of what's called sleep affluence, where you really take time that isn't scheduled, or having more free time. Basically, it's a fancy way to say free time, but having more of that to just like reflect and connect and do the things that bring you joy. So I think fundamentally, we all need to do those things. And I'm a big proponent on when it comes to like meditation and things like that. So I think those fundamental things that you might be learning in school, or you can learn from the Yale course, or you can learn from the Wellness Center, I think are key. When I was in PGY1, so that's the first year of residency, my blood pressure was fairly, borderline high, and I was having sleep issues. And it was by going to a group meditation class for medical residents that I was able to lower my blood pressure. I was able to sleep better in the end by learning meditation approaches. And those helped me like later on in life when I faced a number of different stressful challenges, including during my pregnancies. So I think that's really important. I think there's another layer to it, and probably that's where I'm gonna do a little bit of a deep dive on what's been shown in the literature and what I've noticed in my own life with regards to, staying well and having that work-life balance. I think fundamentally, like, when it comes to wellness and having a good work-life balance, as I mentioned, there's gonna be different points in your life where you're in that seesaw. You have exams, or you're applying for CARMs, or you're applying for medical school. There are times where you do have to work quite a bit, but I think it's about being intentional about honoring yourself. And I think sometimes when we come from groups that have experienced colonization, we've been taught to like work and work and work and see our value in our families and in our social circles as being, people who work a lot. Even in some Black communities, there's these like sayings that's like hustle culture and I'll sleep when I die kind of thing. But what we know is you're more likely to die prematurely if you actually don't sleep. So you want to have a full life. So it's about being really intentional about taking time out when you can. At this point in my career, it has also been about seeking therapy. So I'm very open about that because we have to destigmatize that. Like, I don't have a specific mental health diagnosis, and I don't think you need to seek therapy. I give the example of like LeBron James. uh, like he has his meditation person, his physiotherapist, his psychotherapist, all of those people, so he can be on top of his game, or could be at least. And I think for those of us who are coming from marginalized or racialized or minoritized groups, like you are an Olympian in a way when you're dealing with all the different types of challenges and barriers that might come your way that the rest of society isn't dealing with. So I think it's really important, um, if you can have access to that. Not everybody has access to it, but if you can afford it or it's part of your student insurance, to consider exploring therapy with someone who's culturally safe for you. So somebody who understands either the racism or discrimination or heterosexism or what um, uh, forms of discrimination you might be experiencing. I think that's really important. What's been shown in the literature also is, particularly for youth, is having a strong balance as far as your connection to your ancestral roots as well as to the community that you live in. If they are two different communities, if your ancestral roots are different than the community that you're living in, maybe it's predominantly Eurocentric, but it could be a different, mix of communities. Canada is very diverse. The point is having both gives you a certain amount of strength and sense of self, that's really important when you experience challenges. So I'm a mom. I have 7 and 8 year old boys, but I draw for them a picture of a tree and I say, if you have the strong roots of knowing where you come from, then when the wind blows and challenges happen, you're better able to stay grounded and not be thrown off. But I think the biggest thing that doesn't get discussed a lot in wellness discussions is about the collective, like the need that we have to be able to connect with each other, and like the concept that it takes a village to raise a child, but it takes a village just to be living in this society. It definitely takes a village to support a future healthcare worker, but it also just takes a village to support a mom. It takes a village to support a dad. It takes a village to support just anybody who's navigating this world that we live in. And so that's the piece around wellness that sometimes gets removed. And in that work life balance, I think is most important to keep um, to keep in mind. And so through your journey, when you are studying and later when you are working, it can be very common to not nurture relationships with, old friends or family, especially if they're outside of your school or outside of your work. And I think that is the most one of the most important things, if not the most important, in wellness discussions that don't get addressed. And it's not even my own idea. It's like even if you are able to read the literature of some of the literature of Audre Lorde, who was a Black feminist queer scholar who actually coined the term as we use it today around self care. And so self care gets misused as like go to the spa or go to, I don't know, spend $1 million on a trip. Now, if you have $1 million, fantastic, go, enjoy, okay? But if you don't have $1 million, just know that the actual roots of that vision around self-care was actually about taking time to rest and be connected to community. And even in Trisha Hersey's new book, Rest is Resistance, which I also recommend and I read, there is that idea of taking the time to be in community. And community and be with family doesn't have to be the family that you were born into, okay? You can have a chosen family. Not all of us have a family that we can rely on or connect with. Some of us do, and then it's like lean into that. But even if you don't, there are people over time that as you bring them into your life, it can be very rewarding, but also help you during those difficult times. So there's a singer, I know you folks are young, but I just need to cite her anyways, Erica Badu, um, like a neo soul singer, but she in one of her songs, she says, "Pick your friends like you pick your fruit." And you can do that with friendships, and you can do that with your peers in class, and you can do that with family members as well. Like pick people who will support you and validate you, because on this journey, it's so important to have those connections. So that is really the piece that I want to emphasize. But I'm gonna pause there. But there is a piece around picking your village and picking your family that has to do with allyship, and I'm gonna come to that in a second. But I already have a question. So, folks, please bring your questions. I'm going to be bringing on our special guest. We're starting like a little bit late, but we're at 7:24. So, I want to bring our guest on in about a minute. But um, Yursky, who's here like every week. Okay. So, I appreciate you, Yursky, again, because especially we had a delayed start. I see you. I appreciate you. So, Yursky says, if I have kids once integrated into my work, wait, if I have kids once integrated into my work as a surgeon, fingers crossed, yes, we put that out into the universe, fingers crossed. Will my kids be neglected with demanding hours? How does one have a family and care for them while being a doctor? Hmm, that is a really good question. I feel like it's good to ask a surgeon, and it depends on what type of surgery. So, different surgeons have different intense schedules, but they do tend to have more intense schedules than, let's say, my specialty, which is public health. So yes, it depends on the area of surgery. My understanding is like ENT, ear, nose, throat, or otolaryngology is a little bit less intense than, let's say, general surgery or trauma. But we can certainly revisit that. We have a surgeon on in 2 weeks, Yersky. So it's Dr. Mojola Omole. So we'll, and she's a mama, so we can ask about that. But I would say generally, when you're a physician, I think again, it depends on your support system. It's hard to do it alone. Even if you are a single mom or dad or a single parent, that doesn't mean you're doing it alone. Like, so making sure that you have a support system of like family or friends that you can call upon to support you and working in a supportive environment. Some healthcare, actually, it's not specific to healthcare. Any working environment can be toxic, where people are not supportive. Even if you do have rights and things like that as a parent, um, it helps to be in a supportive environment. So once you are finished your training, you can certainly be selective about where you work. When you interview, you talk to people, you see who has families and how they're doing. As a resident, lots of people do have children. So our first guest, or second, well, actually, our first and second guest. So our first guest last year was Dr. Aisha Lofter. So she's an MD, PhD, family physician with 2 kids. But we also talked to Dr. Chika Oriwa, who just wrote her book, and she is a psychiatry resident and had her children during her residency, right? There was also Santana Hernandez for this season, who is an Indigenous resident and has 4 children. So you can actually do it during residency. I didn't, but some people do. But it is possible. Like I said, it's not a balance that's in stasis. It's a bit of a seesaw. But where things get a little bit tipped, you do need to make sure that you fostered those relationships so that there are people who can support you and or your partner if you do decide to have children with a partner. But even if you don't, it regardless, you need that village and to select that village carefully. So that would be my answer to that. Now it's 7:27, so I do want to introduce our guests. So one other thing. So again, this is health caring differently. I want to talk about balancing work life differently. And for me, I can say that my experience has been certainly being able to accept help from friends and family that are in my village, but also being intentional about accepting help from allies, like people who don't look like me, who can be in spaces and sometimes share some of, again, when you're thinking about committee, often those of us who are racialized are asked to be on committees, asked to do extra projects, asked to do a whole bunch of things. And it's helpful to have an ally who is you can turn to, or several allies, and you can say, you know what, I was asked to do this or that. Do you have the bandwidth to help me? And sometimes they do, or they'll make that space. And so my next guest is exactly, or my surprise guest is as somebody who has done that for me. And we wanted to take this opportunity to talk about allyship and critical allyship, because that is part of staying well. I believe, and having that balance and being able to lean on colleagues. So the person that I'll be bringing up is Dr. Stephanie Nixon, who is Vice Dean, Faculty of Health Science, and Director of the School of Rehabilitation Therapy at Queen's University. So we're going to welcome Stephanie. There we go. We had a little bit of a delay. Dr. Nixon, thank you for joining us. And I also want to emphasize that you are a physiotherapist, because that was one of the trained physiotherapist, because that was one of the requests that we had as well. We had requests for wellness, and we had requests around a career in physiotherapy. But thank you, Dr. Nixon.
I'm so happy to be invited. Thank you for bringing me into this space with you.
Yes. So, I was saying how important it is when we're thinking about balancing work life differently, because that's what health caring differently focuses on. It's those of us who are different than the status quo, and we need to do things differently. I think really seeking out allies and collaborating and sharing and validating is important. So maybe you want to talk a little bit about your career path in general and how you have engaged in this path. I mean, you're not just have been an ally to me, but have really even developed the literature on critical allyship and to so many. So do you want to kind of talk about how you came to this work that you do?
What an invitation. Thank you, Dr. O. I'll go backwards in a minute, but let me start right where I am now, which is I get to be the director of a school of rehabilitation therapy at Queen's that has physical therapy. It also has occupational therapy. So for anyone who's listening, I want you to know that OT is also an incredible profession where really important things are happening in terms of anti-colonial action, sort of intersectional anti-racist action. Like it is a space that, like many others, is finding its way so beautifully with a great diversity of folks that are going to make this profession even more effective than it is already. So it's both OT and PT. If anyone has questions, please come my way and I'll connect you to the right folks. That would make me so happy to be a bridge for anyone.
Thank you. Yes, and we'll put that in the newsletter. You'll have Dr. Nixon's contact or her team's contact. So we'll put that in the newsletter. Yeah. Thank you.
In fact, while I'm on a roll, often within the world of rehabilitation, folks often think about speech language pathology, so dealing with speaking and swallowing, and audiology, hearing. And so I've got a lot of people in those worlds too. They're not my personal worlds, but I know a lot of amazing folks that are there that are really interested in health caring differently. So again, reach out if anyone would like a bridge.
Thank you.
All right, shall I go back and just give you a little, this is going to be, I'm going to work on a nutshell version because this has been going on for decades.
But, I love it.
All right. So the way that I feel like I have this beautiful opportunity to be in relation with you now, Ani, is I was a late bloomer. I came to it late. It took me a long time to wake up to the question of what is my work to do as a white clinician, as a white leader, as a white scholar, right? A white health educator. It took me a long time to get there. And because I'd been taught forever that thing that my job is actually to help people who are pushed to the margins and fix them and save them. And I was doing that in my career for a long time as a physiotherapist and as a researcher, a global health researcher working in HIV, mostly in Southern Africa. And I was really interested in doing equity-oriented work and yet felt like something was off. And it wasn't even so cognitive. It was more like in my belly. Like I had this bad feeling that there was something I was missing. And like was well into my research career at this point, and I think it was spending a lot of time in Southern Africa, in Zambia in particular, and where my whiteness was just in such sharp relief, I couldn't not notice it the way that I could quite easily not notice it for the rest of my life here in this part of Turtle Island. And yeah, I started tuning into these questions of like, I'm still, I can't flatten these hierarchies by the way that I act. I can't be nice enough to like flatten the power. I'm like, what's going on? And why do I have no way of understanding this? Like, I've got a lot of degrees. Why is it that I have a framework for understanding this? And it finally started dawning on me. I'm like, and people be like, oh my God, but it's like, might my whiteness have something to do with this? Might my colonial position have something to do with this? What does colonial position even mean? Might my straightness, my able-bodiedness, and on it went. And it was that kind of waking up to those questions that made me start looking around and being like, does someone know the answer to this? And of course, tons of people know the answer to this. It's just that not a lot of them are actually the leaders in healthcare right now. In fact, it was taught to me over and over again. This is actually the content of many first-year undergrad programs, right? But what I came to think is that by definition, people like me, who are the leaders in healthcare right now, were there because we didn't take those undergrads. We didn't take critical race studies or Indigenous studies or gender studies. So by definition, I think there's a lot of folks who are leaders in healthcare right now who are very well-intentioned, have equity right in their mandate, and yet have no training for a coherent power analysis and don't know that it's something to even know. So that was kind of the turn. And as I started, and a bit of this story, as I started looking around to try and understand this better and discovered the whole world of anti-oppression, and the more I tried to make sense of it from beautiful teachings from people like you, I started drawing on the metaphor of a coin in my head to think it through, where the coin itself is the system of oppression or the ism that gives unearned advantage or unearned disadvantage. And anyways, that seemed to catch on with a few other people. I ended up publishing that as a journal article 5 years ago, and super clear, no new ideas in that paper, right? It's old ideas from Black and Indigenous struggle leaders who have been trying to speak to people like me for decades. And I just haven't been ready to listen. So it was a straight up translation exercise and really naming that any uptake of that paper, and clearly not my ideas. And if these ideas are taken up, we have to understand it as linked to whose body they're coming out of now, right? And understand what's at play. So anyways, it was kind of a paper written to folks like me to try and offer a warm but highly accountable and radical welcome into the world of change making, where we are actually in our lane, understanding that our own liberation and healing and freedom is bound up in this. This isn't about saving and fixing and helping people at the margins. It is about all of us getting free.
I love it. All of us getting free. And, so for me, I feel like the pieces that you described, it's scholarly, but it's also like it's in your pores, like you walk it, you breathe it. So I'll just give a concrete example to our listeners. And then I see there's a question from Mathania. I'm coming for the question. But, I'll give an example, like for healthcaring differently. We are so proud that we were able to work with a number of students and learners over the summer, and pay them to do some quality improvement projects on how we could actually make healthcaring differently better. That's how I know that y'all want to know about work-life balance. That's how I know that you folks want to hear from physio. Like it was those types of pieces. But for me, again, in my work-life balance, I'm not a researcher, nor do I actually very much enjoy research. I do research for advocacy, but it's not my jam, right? And so when you have to do something that's not your jam, it can be draining. And like I mentioned, I have children, I have other things. So I was like, okay, who could possibly, support this? And I thought of you, Dr. Nixon, because I remembered we had that attempt to think about how we can work with Black learners and other marginalized learners and think about creative ways that they can either publish work or present, but then the pandemic happened and that got washed away. But I was like, oh, you know what? And so when I contacted you, do you remember what you said?
No. Tell me.
You're so used to helping folks. I said, oh my goodness, I want to ask you a question. I need some help. Are you busy? And you said, yes, I am busy, but I will make the time. Let's do this.
Mm.
And that was huge, right? Like, yes, we're all busy, but as an ally, you recognize that, you know what I mean? Like the load that I carry, the work that I do, I could use some help. And you said, okay, let's figure out how to do this. And we are going to be, working with that. And we've said it, had a few meetings already, but it's much appreciated. And that is essentially part of the work-life balance. Sometimes
Yes.
I turn to folks or elders or different people who do look like me and have my lived experience. But sometimes I need to turn to white allies and South Asian allies, and after the murder of George Floyd, my indigenous allies. Like there were people that who just had that bandwidth, who had the space to either just listen or to gain, to engage in action. So, anyways, I just want to thank you
Mm.
for that. I wanted to give a concrete example of how, particularly as you folks enter your career in that work-life balance, it is important to seek allies. Not everyone is a true ally, but it's important to do the work to just keep looking. And when you do find allies, it's a beautiful thing.
Mm. Thank you for telling that story. And can I give you my interpretation of what of it from my perspective and connect the dots to work-life balance for me?
Mm-hmm.
It's too easy for me, and I think others that have sit in positions of a lot of privilege, to think that allyship is about being nice, helping, and being altruistic. That is a very dangerous path for thinking about allyship. I tend to think about it as getting in our lanes and thinking about how we're structured in history and figuring out what is our work to do given how we are connected to these historic systems of oppression, and then working in right relation with people across the coin, if you will, to do our collective work of trying to dismantle these systems of oppression. And for me, so when you invited me into that work, I didn't see it as, oh, I should go help Ani. I saw it as Ani's helping me do the work that I am in my lane to do. And the more that I find myself in what I'm understanding from some of my Indigenous, teachers and friends as right relation, this sense of being lined up. What is my work to do and what isn't? When you're in this body, you're not often invited to think about what's not your work to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when I'm in right relation, it is good for my work-life balance. It's good for my healing, right? So you gifted me the chance to be in solidarity with you and for us to do this beautiful, productive, technical work in some senses, healing, connection, humanizing work in others.
Yes. No, thank you. And I think it goes with the South African Zulu principle of Ubuntu. I am
Mm.
because we are. And so you recognize that, again, like my liberation is tied to your liberation. All of us are intertwined as human beings. So, doing work that advances and amplifies the brilliance of, young Black students and scholars isn't
Yeah.
just for me to carry as a Black
Oh.
woman, but it's for us to all carry. And I mean, that's what you essentially have said it. It's that
Mm.
Ubuntu I am because we are, and understanding that deeper connection. I talk too much though. There's questions coming in. So let me listen, right? That active listening that I'm not always good at as a doctor. Let me listen to the questions that are coming in. So Mathania has asked, Mathania V, in those seasons where you're busier than others, how do you deal with the guilt? There's another word there, rent, but I don't know what that means. But the guilt, yeah. So, I mean, I have to turn to the pandemic because I think when I was younger, it's not about being younger, but I think before children, my personality, I'm just going to be honest. Like, if I didn't go to all my friends' birthday parties or something, I didn't experience guilt. Like, I might have experienced FOMO. Like, I wish I was there. Like, I like, my whole thing, if you follow me on Instagram, it's like work hard, play hard. Like, yeah, I want to be at the party. But I wasn't like laden with guilt for me missing a bunch of epic birthday parties or whatever it was. It was a little bit of FOMO, which I could get over. I didn't experience a lot of guilt. If something was really important, like a family member uh, um, was ill or something like that, then I found a way to just take the time off, regardless, right? And sometimes that meant being ducked marks or whatever it was. Like I was very clear on what was important to me in that way. But after children, like, children do want your attention and you are you know what I mean? You are their guide in this life, right? One of their primary guides. For my children, we have a whole village, right? That who they can rely on and who love them. But still, as a mom, it weighed on me. So I think that guilt definitely played in at times where I wasn't able to either show up, or actually what often happened was I wasn't able to show up in the way that I wanted. I often worked from home, but I remember during the pandemic, my kids at the beginning of it was like, they were like 3.5 and 5 years old. And I remember like, first it was pictures of like the family together or whatever, we're all at home. Then their drawings and the crayons, especially after anti-Black racism got declared a public health crisis, because then my work increased. All of a sudden in all of their crayon drawings, like I was there, but I'm holding a phone.
Oh.
And so and they're just like, oh, this is mommy. And she, they would be like, this is mommy. And she's working, she's on her phone, but she's helping people. But all the pictures had so I would just cry at night. So yeah, how do you deal with the guilt? I still had to do the work. So for me, I wasn't necessarily absent, but I wasn't present in the way that I wanted to be. And I could say there's even photos that I look at where I was there, but I don't remember being there. Like I just wasn't as present. So I had a lot of guilt about that. And I think it's that piece that I said, sometimes the seesaw will be like this, but you have to be intentional. And so months in advance, I began to plan about the changes that I was going to make in my life once the pandemic was, reducing, to be able to be more emotionally present. Even if I was physically present, I wasn't like emotionally and mentally present. So I've made those changes. Sometimes you're in a situation like, again, it could be CARMS, it could be medical school. There are going to be medical school applications or whatever. There are going to be times that are very intense. But if you can have that hope that at the end of that, you have a way to be intentional about your wellness and actually a plan. So I had to create a plan towards that. Hope sometimes is not enough. You have to be concrete about the things you're going to change, where you're going to work, how you're going to live. So that's how I dealt with that. And I think it's going pretty well. Okay. It said, sorry, my question was incomplete. In those busier seasons, how do you deal with the guilt of not being present in the lives of those you care about? Okay, so I've answered that, Nathania. So I didn't get the full question, but then I did in the end. So Dr. Nixon, what about you? How do you have?
What's coming to mind for me so much listening to your reflection, Dr. O, is the place of compassion. I have so much compassion in the middle of the pandemic, Dr. O, trying to hold all the things, right? And like, yeah, you made your plan, and yeah, you figured it out, and yeah, you like got your, your balance back. And that was a really hard time that you had. And I guess I'm just thinking about, the folks who are asking questions like that, and I'm just having compassion for them too, right? That comes from a place that probably means that they're having a bit of guilt. And so it's that work, and I'll tell you what, it's way easier to have compassion for others than it is to have the self-compassion to say, hey, it's okay. This is hard. Hello, guilt. I see you're here. You're trying to give me some kind of message received. Now you can settle down. I'm just going to have a bit of care for self, and keep going.
Yeah. No, I think that's key. And that compassion also goes with the fact that, again, like I said, it's a seesaw. So as much as I say I made a plan and there are going to be other times. Life is lifing, okay? And there's ups and downs. And there's going to be other times that my seesaw, goes in a different way. And I'll feel guilt again. And I'll be like, oh, but I thought I had figured this out.
You again.
Right? And I think it's compassion for that as well, that we're learning as human beings. And it's not necessarily that we've, you know what I mean? You think you figured out, and then life is lifing, and then you realize you haven't entirely figured it out. And so I'm also open to or I have compassion for myself almost in advance, knowing that even though I am trying my best, I'm not in control of everything. And there are going to be other times in life where I'm going to be busier again, and I'm going to experience guilt again. And whatever I did this time that worked might not even work. I'll have to find another way. And I have to have compassion for that, which I didn't used to, actually. I'd be like, didn't I learn last time? Why am I here again? So, yeah. But yeah, the compassion part is really, thank you for raising that. I think the self-compassion is a harder one than compassion for others most of the time.
It makes me also think about what are the signals that guilt is giving us, or overwhelm, or can I hold all of this? And it's tough stuff to hold. It's also sometimes a feature of being us who are shooting for the stars. Like it comes along with, maybe it's part and parcel of a beautiful ambition that is trying to build a more just future, right? And find our place in it. And we're like searching for all these ways to be engaged in it. And meanwhile, we've got all, the relationality, all the folks we're in relation with. And sometimes it's just a lot. And maybe it's less a problem and more a sign that, wow, we're really going for a lot here. And yeah, it's time to rebalance. But while we're in the practice of living these lives and of trying to like be kind to ourselves and others and live well and be in right relation, that this is part of it. It's not doing it wrong. Maybe it's doing it right? We tip over every now and then. It's a bit much. I'm like, oh, okay, bring it back.
Yeah.
But it is actually, maybe it's something we normalize as a feature of being in this work.
And I'm trying to do that. And I think, I mean, those of you listening, you're, likely earlier in your journeys, and hopefully this, bit of wisdom is helpful. But it is tough. And I've also had, challenging experiences with people who I thought were allies. And I think where we want to be allies to others and we engage allies, again, people are not perfect either, right? And so somebody can be a really great ally in one situation and in another, they're not. And for ourselves, sometimes we're in a position to step up and be an ally for others. And we sometimes do a great job. But when we hear from, you know what I mean? There could be another time we hear from somebody else and we did not do a great job.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of this has to do with, again, kind of like being okay with the ups and downs. I feel like I don't want to get sued by Disney, but this idea of like happily ever after in a stasis, you know what I mean? Like you've reached it and then that's it. I feel like we all need to let that go. We're all going to be, struggling to find allies, struggling to be allies, struggling to have work-life balance, struggling to recorrect that balance. And I think that's all part of the journey.
Yeah. Yeah. Tell me if this resonates, Dr. O, that what I've come to understand as I've been trying to figure out, so what's my work to do? How do I be in this? Especially as a leader now, like as a senior leader in the health academy, like in the university health space, is what does active anti-oppressive practice look like as a senior leader? And one of the things I've come to realize is what works for me is almost a total divestment from outcome and a total investment in process or practice, or even what someone called praxis. I don't know if folks are familiar with that framing. Praxis, like the inseparability of the radical theory from action. They're only coupled, right? There's no thinking about it and not doing. There's only walking the talk. And what I found is that the more that I invest in a very principled approach to here's how I wish to move in the world, outcome tends to take care of itself. And so I can suspend the happily ever after part and be, no, I'm going to try and move in this way that it is deeply caring and loving to others and myself, highly accountable to others and myself, that where there's a big place for compassion, that's steeped in relationality, that is, humble. It's all these things, right? And for each of us, we frame that out. But the more I find that I can try to practice those anti-oppressive principles, the outcome ends up being better than I could even try. I don't know. More and more, I'm finding that's actually a way to help me stay well.
No, I think that is key. I'm thinking about that. And yeah, I think sometimes folks are really too focused on the outcome. And I mean, this is for you folks in healthcare as well. Sometimes like, oh, we're going to do this study and we're going to go into, and you could be Black and say you're going into the Black community. You could also be non-Black, say you're going, but it's the same problem. You're going in thinking about, we need to publish and we need to do this thing. And maybe you want to change the world, but you're not thinking about your relationship with that community. Again, this can happen even, and had happened to me when, thinking about working in Black communities, even as a Black person, but not fully thinking about my positionality, not thinking about my relationships and how I come in a good way, and bringing that very like colonial lens that I have been taught to go and think about the outcome and extract, right, wisdom from communities so it can be published or whatever. So I think the process does matter. Being in relation and doing things, as my Indigenous colleagues say, in a good way. And I think what you've said, Stephanie, is it does, or Dr. Nixon, it does. We like to doctor in this space. I think it's important, but I think it really is important to think about, that piece around the process and doing it in a good way and knowing that it's not going to be in a perfect way.
Yeah.
That being said, though, so I'm going to ask you two pieces of advice. If there are folks who are, in particular, I'm going to name white allies. All of us can be allies in different situations, cis ally, or you know what I mean, to trans folks or what have you, depending on where you are on that coin of power and privilege. But when it comes to white folks who want to engage in allyship with folks who are racialized or minoritized in some way, do you have, I think you've already given some key pearls, but any particular advice, especially for folks who are early on their journey? Maybe they are students even.
I love that. We have so much work to do, white folks, to figure out what is and isn't our lane. And what I was taught within the Health Academy, like through my health training degrees, was not helpful when it comes to trying to create a more just future for all. It was actually the opposite. And it wasn't that anyone had bad intentions, right? This is not an issue of bad intentions. This is an issue of being socialized into white supremacy and trying to figure out, what does that even mean or look like? How is that baked right into health professions, education and research and healthcare? And so for folks who already have a sense of that, we can start there. Most white folks couldn't receive the framing I just offered up there. And so this is why I do a lot of work around what I call the coin of privilege. This is why I published it as a peer-reviewed article, because one of the best reasons to publish in the academic literature is to legitimize critical ideas. Because once it's been published, it must be right then. So it was very intentional, right? And so there's an actual article called The Coin Model of Privilege and Critical Allyship. And this, it's an open access journal, and it was published 5 years ago. And my job as an academic is to publish papers. Like, I've published a lot of papers. Mm-hmm. This one has had more hits than every single other thing I've ever published put together. This one gets 1,000 new accesses every 2 or 3 weeks and has since it was published.
I'm not surprised.
Something about this. So it really tries to be that beautiful, warm, engaging, welcoming bridge to folks who are well-intentioned but do not have a power analysis, to say, come on in, we've been waiting for you. And so in terms of what would be tips, it's this business of often folks start inside the analysis they've got, and it's just not going to go well, right? We need to actually understand a far more coherent power analysis about how we got into this mess in the first place, by which I mean the invention of whiteness as a power structure, which gave rise to and made possible, to my mind, all the other systems of oppression that are so salient in this particular society now. So I've got all this work on the coin model and videos and that sort of thing. I'll tell you 2 others, if that's all right.
Yeah.
2 not me resources. One is right within the health sector out west in BC is an amazing project called Unlearning and Undoing White Supremacy. It's led by Danielle Bain-Smith, an Indigenous leader, quite senior leader within the BC government, and a white anti-colonial leader named Kate Youngblood, with a J, Youngblood. Danielle Bain-Smith and Kate Youngblood are doing this amazing, really systemic work around uprooting white supremacy within healthcare in BC. So I appreciate that so much. I learned so much from them. And it's just a really good example of it not being something outside the health sector, but right within it. And then the last powerful resource that's just been so profoundly important for me, I realized I don't have mentors within healthcare, white mentors who are actively role modeling interrupting white supremacy in themselves and in the health sector. I like this imagination work. I'm like, what does that even look like? And I realized I need to look outside to find where are the white folks who have been in this work for a long time, in deep relation with Black and Indigenous struggle leaders and others, And I'll tell you where I found it was with a grassroots organizing group called Surge Toronto. SURJ stands for Showing Up for Racial Justice.
Ooh.
Surge Toronto. And so once I started organizing with them, it just opened my eyes so much. I thought I'd been doing justice work my whole life. And I was like, oh, this is completely different. So for any white folks who are interested in understanding in a much more coherent way, what might it look like to actually show up in anti-racist action, there are Surge chapters all over the States, and a big one in Toronto and a few others emerging around Canada.
That is fantastic and helpful. Again, the work is not only our own, and if we're looking at big picture work-life balance, then that is part of helping with that balance. When the work of anti-oppression and decolonial work is not solely on the shoulders of those experiencing the violence of oppression and the everyday discrimination. We've got. I'm going to take one more question. Mathania is like on fire, so we've got another question from Mathania, and then after that we'll wrap up. But Mathania said, systematically speaking, how do you push things forward and prove that your process works without focusing on outcomes, especially when it comes to anti-colonial changes? So I'm going to answer this because, again, being a Black person, as a physician, I still learned colonial ways of going into community, like I said, and extracting in order to publish, or thinking that I was going to go in and save the community. So even for those of us who are Black or racialized or Indigenous, we learn these colonial processes in our education, and then sometimes come back to our communities and replicate harmful things. So I'll answer this, and then Dr. Nixon, I'll pass the virtual mic to you. So even in that sentence, prove that your process works, that's still an outcome. So you're not proving anything. You have to actually decide that what the outcome is not more important to you than the people. 2 examples. When we were doing vaccine clinics in Black and racialized communities during the COVID-19 pandemic, like, yes, we had to keep track of how many people we vaccinated, but our goal wasn't like, let's see how many people we could vaccinate today. It's how many people we were going to speak to and engage in that, like what I said, Ubuntu, look people in the eye and speak to them, introduce ourselves, take the time. And if they didn't want the vaccine, then that was okay. Right? They didn't want, but do you need some, do your children want Play-Doh? Do you want some soup? Do you want, you know what I mean? Like thinking about them as the whole person and actually not focusing on the outcomes. Of course, we know we're running a vaccine clinic, we're going to vaccinate, but that's not our goal, right? And when people did get the vaccine, then it was like, we're going to celebrate you, right? Go tell a friend, tell your family you did it, right? So it was about being in relation and focusing on the people rather than the outcome. And so we didn't need to prove that you know what I mean? We had Bob Marley playing in the background. We do all these things. We don't have to prove that we connected. We were just there to connect and do our best to do that. Another example is when we first were working on cancer screening in Black communities, we made it a point to do a pre-research that we weren't going to publish. It was just focus groups in community, tried to keep the budget as tight as possible and find out what people felt around cancer screening. And then we brought that information back to them. Later on, we did do a full study with data and we published, but the journal said, what about this whole chunk where you said you engaged community? Where's that data? And we say, you're not going to have it because we said to the community, we're not sharing it with you. Are you publishing or not? Because we're not giving it to you. And so there are lots of ways that you can really focus on relationship with community, not having to prove it, but in that moment or after different sessions, you get a sense of if you're building a good relationship or not. That's what you should be more concerned with as opposed to proving that you did it. Did you have it? Does it feel right? Maybe you're getting feedback from them or people showing up and coming back. So there's other ways to know if you're in good relationship with folks. Dr. Nixon?
That's great. What a beautiful examples.
Okay, I wasn't sure if you were muted. But are there ways for you?
Yeah, you're hearing me okay?
Are there ways for you? There was a bit of a delay, so that's why I was just double checking. But yeah, are there ways that you have known that you are doing good work, even when you're not focusing on the outcomes? How do you know that you're
Yeah.
doing that good work?
Yeah. I think that question is so welcome. Even after I told that last story, I'm like, if I were the folks listening right now, I'd be like, what? What do you mean don't pay attention to outcome? Yeah. So here it is. Like my theory of, it's not that I don't care about outcome. I care deeply about outcome. My theory of change is that the best way to get the best outcome is to focus on the praxis. And I've got endless examples of how that's playing out for me as I try it out. But I want to tell you one because it's just such a beautiful story. And it starts a bunch of years ago. I was at a different university that I am now, and that university recognized that there was a vast underrepresentation of Black, Indigenous, and Indigenous students in the OT, PT, and speech language pathology programs, and so participated with other health science programs to offer a day of special training for high school kids who were Black and Indigenous. And year over year, it would go on, and it was pretty appreciated, and the folks who were involved really enjoyed it. And I came to work at that environment and was interested in being involved, so asked to step in. And what I realized when I came into it was that all of the training that was being offered was by the white professors, because that's who the faculty was, right? And almost all white women too. So well-intentioned, smart, and understanding their work to do to show up to help underrepresented groups, as opposed to something else, right? So if it's not helping, then what is it? It's like, wait a second, back up. It's how do we leverage the positions of power that we hold to try and collaborate across the coin in solidarity to do change making together to lead to a solution that's way better than the one we've got now, because it's actually been led by the folks who hold the expertise and not just all the good intentions like me. So anyways, what I figured out, and sometimes these things go fast, sometimes they go slow. This one, it took some time, but I had a couple of pals because there's no Black or Indigenous folks on faculty at the time. And so I'm reaching out into the community to my Black physio pals out there. I'm like, I've got this idea, this thing's happening. Can you imagine being involved? They're like, yes. And I'm like, how would we do this, right? And it was more making the space. I had the power over this thing. And it's like, what if I were to release it? And like, do the relational work. And the more I talk to just a couple people to start, these brilliant Black women, physios, who you're all going to love when you all want to go into physio and you want to meet these incredible women.
We did
connect you to.
So,
honestly, they fire me up so much. And they were like, here's how we could do it. And I think we get this person, and then do the same thing around. I had one Indigenous physio colleague who's doing this amazing work down at Six Nations. So just kind of slowly building relation with her and exploring what would make this worth her while. Like, even her time is pulled in so many directions. Anyways, fast forward to the next year. It took us a year to get this going. We totally turned it inside out. By the time, and I still get the chills thinking about this. So we had an auditorium filled full of 100 Black and Indigenous high school students. And at the front of the room was a dozen Black and Indigenous therapists. That's all that was there. And little me hiding in the back because I just wanted to see a little bit of it, but even knew decenter, Nixon, decenter yourself. So it was happening, and they were at the front of the room, and they ran the day. Of course, it was brilliant, better than it ever had been before. But what also came out of that was those folks at the front of the room. They hadn't been gathered before. A lot of them didn't know each other. They were like, wow. Everyone was so used to, as the story I hear, of being the only. Mm-hmm. And here, maybe two of us in a room, but all of us in a room and being the only ones in the room. And you know what that gave rise to? Continued getting together and this idea that there should be an association of Black physiotherapists. Fast forward a few more years, it exists. Right? It's this beautiful formed association. And then, you know what that group decided with others? We need to change the national accreditation standards for physiotherapy programs right across the country to include a requirement, not I volunteer to be anti-racist, a requirement that in order for a school to be accredited in Canada, there has to be comprehensive programming around anti-oppression, including anti-racism and including anti-Indigenous racism, anti-Asian racism, anti-Black racism, and others. And I said, sometimes things go fast, sometimes they go slow. This was it was unbelievable. It was the right combination of people were in place. The right white leader was right there at the time of the national group who was ready to mobilize her power to make way, right? And now we have actually two new criteria within the national standards. One's around anti-oppression and the other is around relation with Indigenous folks. So it's whoo,
Yeah.
I never dreamt up any of that stuff, but by attending to principal, the magic happens.
Yes. And in that, so there's so much to unpack there and so much beauty and love in that. We're gonna wrap up soon because we started 7 minutes later, so we're at 8:07. But there's a couple of things that I want to flag. One is, and I think this is one thing I hope you picked up on, Mathania, is the piece around time.
Mm.
Once things are in alignment, things can go very quickly, but it takes time to build those relationships. And if you're focused on outcomes, you rush people and it does not help to build trust. Trust is not given, it is earned, and that takes time. So it took a year, but if you were like, "Can you come next week? Can you then you're not paying attention to the person and all the things that they have to do. You want them to show up all of a sudden and perform. But now it took a year. You know what I mean? It took time. So that's another thing that people pay attention to when you're going into community and you're overly focused on outcome. You will rush them and it will often sever relationships. But once you do build that trust and you do build the relationships, lots of things can then it's you know what I mean? It's a train and it's a
That's
beautiful
it.
it's a beautiful thing. So thank you for sharing that story. And it actually answered my second question because I was going to say what is or part of it. So, what is your advice to Black folks or other racialized folks or Indigenous folks who are interested in physiotherapy, occupational therapy, or the other therapies? But you mentioned these associations. I presume that students can reach out to them and we can put it in our newsletter, or what
Yeah,
are your
absolutely.
recommendations?
Yeah, let me tell you, we need these folks in the profession so badly. Everything gets better when diverse folks are there. Everything gets better. And so, yeah, we need folks desperately, and there's lots and lots of folks already there who really want to welcome everyone in. So a lot of these groups aren't formalized yet, but the movements are underway. So in some ways, I want to say, Dr. O, that folks might not have an easy time finding groups online, and it's more like the inner working, since a lot of it is slightly informal at the moment, but it is happening. So use me or other contacts that you have to say, if I was looking for this, how would we find it? And we'll do the good detective work and get folks connected, because there's pretty much nothing more exciting to folks who are already in it to hear the next generation coming up right behind saying come on, let's go.
Yes. So in our newsletter, check out our newsletter. We'll let you know how you can get in touch with Dr. Stephanie Nixon and her networks. We'll put those books that you mentioned around white allyship. And the final piece, of course, for work-life balance is you don't want to reinvent the wheel. Contact mentors who look like you. And because we're underrepresented, mentors who don't look like you, because that'll also help your work-life balance. So we will have more information from Dr. Stephanie Nixon in the newsletter. So how you can look for mentors, how those folks who are white allies can, understand how to do the work in a better way and in a good way. And overall, I'll also include the, general Yale free resource on the science of well-being so that we can help you folks have that study life balance, but then as you go through your journey, hopefully have that work-life balance, which, like I said, is more like a seesaw, but ride that wave and enjoy and have joy along the way. So that's what we hope for you. So thank you, Dr. Nixon, for joining me on this conversation. All right. So I'll just let you know next week we're going to have a regular programming. So this was a different tea time and with a special surprise guest. But next week we know who the guest is. And the guest is Dr. Andrew Thomas with the topic we're going to talk about leadership. And we're also going to talk about prison health because he works in prison health. So I think that'll be cool if you haven't heard about or learned about prison health before. So thank you very much for watching. And please follow us on social media, sign up for our newsletter, and I will see you next Tuesday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time.